Well, Elon and Trump are having a major high school breakup. They're being acting like children,
I know.
more so than usual.
Where do we side on this? To me, this is like, I don't know. It's like Alien versus Predator. I mean, it's very hard to have a rooting interest. Trump keeps doing this to me because he keeps on antagonizing people who I hate. And so I wind up rooting for people like the Cheney family. Laura Loomer was another one who I had to root for briefly. And now I'm like, Elon, these are my people. I just don't understand. It's really the worst thing he's ever done. Um, but, who could have predicted that Trump and Elon was not going to last? And the answer is pretty much everybody, right? I
Everybody.
mean, no one, this is the least, when you say this is a news story, news, I feel like, implies some element of surprise. And this is the least surprising development ever. As a matter of fact, right after the election, when people were so depressed, I did a post, and the name of the post, it's available very much at the Borowitz Report. You can look it up. It's called What Happens Now? And I made some predictions, and almost all of them have come true, but they were very, very easy calls. And one of them was I said that the whole MAGA coalition was going to fracture. And it's already happening. I mean, these people, when you're driven by hate, when that is your primary emotion, you're bound to hate each other at some point. I mean, it's not like you're full of love for everybody else in your tribe and you just hate everybody who's outside the tribe. No, you hate your fucking tribe as well. So that's what we're seeing. We're seeing, Elon and Steve Bannon. If those two Nazis can't get along, what does that say about the rest of us? I mean, they should be bound together by their love of Hitler salutes, and yet they can't get along. And then you have Laura Loomer and Marjorie Taylor Greene don't like each other. So you have that.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah. And of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert have hated each other historically. So
It
it's
feels like
not,
high school, it feels like high school all over again.
it is like high school if everybody was on ketamine instead of marijuana. I would say that it does. There's a big similarity. Plus, like in high school, you would just, if you had a breakup, you'd be talking smack about your ex all the time. And, now that since Elon actually owns a prominent social media platform, he can talk smack about Trump to like 9 billion people. So it's enjoyable for those of us who are not part of this coalition to see it splinter in this way. But again, not really news. I have to downgrade this from news. I don't know what sub news category. Entertainment? Is this entertainment?
Unfortunately, it is. But I mean, it's is it dissolving or devolving faster than you expected it to,
No,
or is it
I
right
didn't
on
think.
schedule?
I mean, I didn't think. Again, I'm not positioning myself as Nostradamus here. I think these were very easy calls. But I thought that Elon and Trump would certainly not last the year. As it turns out, let's see, the inauguration was January 20th. So it didn't even last 5 months. I think I'm doing the math correctly. So my math is slightly better than Linda McMahon's. She's our Secretary of Education, has some problem with the multiplication operation. So yeah, I mean, I didn't think it would last the year. And it's now, it's already over. So, but I mean, is this going to be like Fleetwood Mac? I mean, are they going to like have a reunion at some point?
Right.
I don't know. I doubt
It's
it.
possible. I'm hopeful that it's going to help the Democrats in that Musk's money is not there to primary in the way it was. And Musk said today, he said, Trump wouldn't have won had it been for me. So
It's true, although I have to question, if I may be serious for a moment. I wonder if the role of money in today's politics is somewhat overrated, simply because Elon did spend a fortune on that Wisconsin race. And actually, if anything, his money had a reverse effect. It
That's
drove people
now.
away.
Yeah. Right.
So it did have an impact. I'm just not sure if it had the impact that was desired. And I would say of the issues that the Democrats had in the presidential election, I wouldn't say money was one of them because I think they raised and spent over $1 billion. And if you can't buy an election for $1 billion, I don't want to live in a world where it costs more than $1 billion to buy an election. I'm
Well,
sorry.
I know. But I mean, my point was that Elon Musk is threatening Congress members that if you don't do what Trump wants
Right.
you to do, wants you to do, then I will primary you, and you'll lose your job and your power and your status. So
Right.
that's
But
what the hope was
as
for.
we saw in Wisconsin, I wonder if that threat just then becomes a
Right.
negative
Maybe it's
attack
no
ad that the
longer.
Democrats
Yeah.
then use. They just Photoshop a picture of the primary candidate along with Elon, and he's instant kryptonite. So, I mean, I just think a world in which Elon Musk has less influence is good for everybody,
It's a good one. Agreed.
except maybe the Afrikaners, those poor oppressed white people who are coming here in search of
Mm.
a better an apartheid system that's still up and running. They're
Yeah.
here for that.
Yeah.
So other
Right.
than the Afrikaners, I don't really know. I would say like Elon's children benefit from him, but they don't really because he's a deadbeat dad.
Yeah.
So I don't. I think the less Elon, the better, probably.
I agree. And let's hope it continues. Um, what else? So you and I have known each other for a
Long time.
long time since we met at the New Yorker,
I mean, I think we
and
probably met at
in the
one
old
of
days.
those. We met at one of those New Yorker parties
Yeah.
back in the
That,
day. I mean, I think you. What year did you start at the New Yorker?
right. Well, I sold my first cartoon in '79.
Okay, so
Hmm.
that was like 19 years before I got involved. So you're a veteran. I will say that when I started was in 98, and maybe this is too inside baseball, though I have to say people who subscribe to your Substack probably are into the New Yorker world because your brand is very much New Yorker cartoonist.
That's true.
But
Yeah.
but when I joined, and I was really never on staff, really. I was always a contributor. Even when I was doing the Borowitz report for them, I was sort of an independent contractor. But when I joined, we were still in kind of the afterglow of the Tina Brown years. And
Mm.
Tina Brown was great at a lot of things when she was a magazine editor. One thing Tina was really great at was throwing parties. So you and I probably met at some very posh Tina Brown event. And then
Yeah.
Tina Brown like jumped ship right before I got involved. I don't know if those two things are related in any way, but I would say that over the years, I felt like as the legacy media has imploded, I would say, and this is not something that any reader of the New Yorker or Vanity Fair would discern, but I would say the quality of the parties, the budget of the parties definitely shrank. I would say the last New Yorker party I attended, there were boxes of pizza and I think $9 bottles of wine. And I
I
thought,
was at the same party, and it was
yes,
in the offices,
in
right?
the
Yeah.
office. I remember seeing you there, and it was like
Hmm.
if if Tina Brown could see this, she'd be horrified. But I mean,
I'm
it's just a
sure she would
reality. I
hear
mean,
stories.
it's
Well,
why it's why you and I and so many other people from the legacy media are here on Substack because it's a better business model, at least for this century. I mean, the 20th century was very kind to magazines because there was all that print advertising for like luxury cars and Bulgari
mhm,
jewels and watches and stuff.
right.
And that is no longer a thing. So now you and I are talking to each other on our phone in front of bookcases and things like that. We're like, we're in the bunker. We're in the
You
bunker.
know, yeah. You have to figure it out because the legacy media is not supporting us.
But
I
I feel
mean,
like I feel like just from my observation of what you're doing, like I feel like you're thriving in the Substack, the
yeah,
stackosphere. Like I feel
right.
like you are now calling the shots because when you were, I know you still submit to the magazine and do commercial stuff in the legacy world, but it's you're someone else is a gatekeeper, and someone else is deciding what your programming is going to be.
Right.
And here it's like, if you want to do, let's say you want to go live with me for half an hour, that's your, I can't
That's great.
necessarily,
Yeah.
I
No.
can't necessarily endorse that decision from a business point of view, but you chose
Well,
to
I'm
do it.
hoping,
And
Andy, I'm hoping you're gonna just that your followers are gonna flood to my Substack is what I'm hoping. I don't really
it'll
care about
blow up.
talking to you. I'm just using you. Um, um, yeah, no, the Substack model, Medium, I was on Medium. I'm still on Medium, which is a
Uh-huh.
similar model, not quite as effective, but I'm so uh um what's the word? Touched that people get it, at least this demographic understands that creatives are struggling and that they just I don't really use the paywall at all, but they
Hmm.
still want to support me financially, and I think that's fantastic. And I think the legacy media is people are jumping ship right and left from CNN anyway
Well,
and
yeah, I
MSNBC.
mean, it's basically, there was a great model in cable. Now we're doing a business show, which I love.
Yeah.
But there was a great model in cable
Well, we're
television.
businessmen. We have to be to be
We
to
have
be
to be.
independent. Go ahead.
We're
Hmm.
entrepreneurs. So there was a great model in cable TV for a long time, which is that people had to pay for a bundle of channels before cord cutting started. So you had people who maybe never watched the Food Channel had to subscribe to the Food Network along with ESPN, and people who just wanted to learn how to bake cakes were stuck with ESPN. And then now what's happened is people are consuming content on an a la carte basis, which is they just are saying, we don't really want magazines or bundles. We want Liza Donnelly, or we want to see Jim Acosta. We want to see these individual purveyors who we enjoy. And
Right.
it's made it really hard for the magazine model to survive unless they're doing something super distinctive, or unless they've really found a way to skin the cat. I mean, I feel like the New York Times is surviving basically because they're not really a newspaper website. They have games, they have recipes, they have Wirecutter. Wirecutter is like, you know,
Right.
basically, they're parking their car in a lot of other people's driveways, and they're taking away. People might have gone to a cooking site before, but now they can just get that one app and get everything.
Hmm.
And the problem is, there aren't really they've kind of become kind of a category killer. There aren't that many. If you've got that Times app, and I very dutifully play my games every morning, but I don't need any more games. Like, I've got the games. I don't really follow recipes per se, but my wife does. So she likes the recipes, and I will, if I want to buy a new patio umbrella, I will go to Wirecutter. So what I don't often do is actually go to the news on the New York Times, because I
Where
find their coverage so irritating.
so
Um,
where do you get your news though? So I'm curious. Where do you get your news?
well, I listen to the BBC, which is free. You can download their app, and you can. Why anyone watches CNN is anybody's guess. You can watch the BBC all day long for free on your phone, and it's
Hmm.
much higher quality. And they have on the app, they also have great BBC radio stations like the World Service and Radio 4,
Hmm.
which is a good service. And they have a zillion podcasts on all different topics. I mean, history, news. By the way, I'm not being paid by the BBC at
Yeah,
all.
that was
This
my
is like,
next question. That was my next question. Like,
no, this is just, I can't remember how I kind of gravitated to the BBC. But one thing I also really like about the BBC, in all seriousness, is that they're not obsessed with America. They do cover America very fully, but Trump, although he does get an outsized amount of attention on the BBC, it's not like our media where basically he just says something idiotic like, Joe Biden is a robot, and everybody feels they have to cover it. They might cover that in a very bemused way for a few
hmm.
minutes, but
Hmm.
it's not uh it's not there isn't the for obvious reasons. There isn't the focus on America. The other thing is, because Britain has this imperial history, people in the UK tend to be interested in other parts of the world. Like they're very interested in Africa, for example, and Asia. So you'll actually learn about what's going on elsewhere, about the political struggles in other countries. And in a way, it's kind of soothing because you realize we're not the only ones who are so fucked up. It's pretty
Yeah,
bad to be in
this is true. Yeah.
Sudan as well.
Uh,
So it's not.
yeah.
So I mean, it's the one magazine I subscribe to is The Economist. And the reason I do that is
Mm,
because, again, they cover the world. And they, if anything, they have kind of a center right bias, I would have to say. It's not, they don't share my politics per se.
mhm.
But I like the fact that it's a rational publication. Like they tend to view everything through the lens of capitalism, which I find actually kind of funny because it's kind of like if it's good for capitalism, the Economist is on board. It's sort of they're a little bit a little bit blasé about the niceties of human rights and stuff, except as it impacts profits
Well,
and
you know their bias. It's quite clear what their bias is, so you
and
need
you
to
know
take
what,
it into
Liza,
account.
we all have biases. Like
Oh, yeah.
people who look at your cartoons or read your writing, they know that you have a bias. People know what my bias is, but I think there's no such thing as being free of bias. And it's one thing that I saw this documentary about Molly Ivins, the great humorist,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and
I
and
love her.
it's a wonderful documentary. I recommend. There's only one. I don't remember the name of it. I think it's like Raise Hell or Raising Hell. I recommend everybody see it. But there's a great clip on it that I felt really had an impact on me, which is she said, look, there is no such thing as objectivity. And when everybody reads what I have to say, they just are factoring in what my bias is.
Right.
But I'm not pretending to be objective. And that's what I think people are finding so grating about, say, the New York Times or CNN, which is that they're trying to achieve the impossible, which is
Right.
balance. There's no such thing as balance. And so they'll have somebody like, I don't know if you ever wander onto CNN, but like when I'm in an airport or in a hotel room, I will see it. And they've got like, because they have quote unquote liberals on the channel, they will also have this guy, Scott Jennings, who's
Oh, I know. Yeah.
the most odious guy. I mean, I don't know what he's like in person, but on TV, he's playing the most odious person in the world. He's playing a straight up professional wrestling heel.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sorry, that is like having a liberal person and then a crazy asshole who's disagreeing with all the liberals in a very rude way. That's not balanced. That's
No,
just that's having
I
an
know.
asshole
Well,
on
it's it's reality TV. I mean, they're just
yeah.
setting up the conflicts to get eyeballs, and it's
Which
boring.
which they've done. I mean, in fairness to them, they started doing it even before reality TV. They had the show Crossfire back in
Oh,
the day.
yes, I know.
And very famously, Jon Stewart went on the show. He was invited as a guest, and I think they thought that he was going to be very genial and make a lot of funny wisecracks about politics. And instead, he just completely tore them a new one and said, "You're part of the problem because you just are polarizing people and you're shouting at each other." And that's the one thing I actually find really charming about the BBC, which is that they have in their charter that they have to be impartial, which, as we just discussed, is impossible. But it leads to a lot of unintentional comedy because they will refer to Adolf Hitler as a genocidal dictator, and somebody will jump in and say, well, I should say at this juncture that because Mr. Hitler isn't here to defend himself. Um, it doesn't quite go that far, but it almost does. It's like, since Mr. Dahmer is not here,
Mhm.
let's not
Mhm.
call him a
Right.
serial killer.
Well, I mean,
So
that's go ahead.
it's very British.
Yes. Yes. Well, I mean, that's what people were trying to do with Trump in the beginning. They were trying to say, well, treat him as a normal person, a normal
Yeah.
candidate, a normal president, when in fact he's certainly not. And the house is on fire, so we need to do more. We need to call it what it is. Um,
Yeah,
Speaking of
and
which, mhm.
I'll go ahead, but I would say
Yeah, go ahead.
one of the Trump's point of view, I would say, is very generously represented on, on several media. channel, so we don't really have to worry about him getting his points made. I don't think he's being
Yeah, well, I know.
drowned out by the liberal media.
No,
Anyway,
true.
go ahead. I sort
Do you
of
think do you think there was talk recently of, how the liberals need to get their own, Fox News or their own, right or left-wing, uh, media empire to counter, like, the Joe Rogans of the world? Um, I don't see that
well,
happening anytime soon.
I mean, is it not happening or has it already happened? I mean, hasn't Rachel Maddow had a huge audience since like 2008? I mean, I feel like those voices are out there. I mean, I feel like there's certainly are progressive radio hosts who like Tom Hartman who've been around for a long time. I mean, when they say a liberal Joe Rogan, they mean a liberal who has hundreds of millions of listeners. That's a slightly
That's
different issue.
right,
It's
that's what
like,
I mean.
I mean, I
The
don't know that you
power to lie, to power to control, listeners, to lie to them and have them believe you, and I don't think Rachel Maddow does that, so the
no, but
the yeah, the Democrats are too divided in terms of their liberal versus moderate. They don't and I know the Republicans are too in a certain degree, but there's more right wing, Joe Rogan nutcases voting for Trump than we have on the Democratic side or the liberal side.
that is true. Although one thing I always feel like I have to jump in and say when this topic comes up is this was a very close election.
Ah, no.
I keep on seeing these articles in the New York Times talking about the Democratic brand being, toxic and it's a five alarm fire. And I want to say, well, actually, really had 700,000 votes gone a different way, Kamala
Mhm.
Harris would have won in the swing states and she'd be president. So I've lived through actual landslides, and I know you have too. Reagan had two landslides. Nixon in 72, that was a landslide. We're talking about where the Democrats win like one state, like in 1972, they won Massachusetts. Uh, so I guess what I'm saying is like I've lived through when it's like to feel like, you know, close to 60% of the country feels one way. And that is a very alienating experience.
Mhm.
Right now, what we have is like 40% of the country is in the tank for Trump, and we'll go, we'll drink the Kool-Aid in a true Jim Jones manner. Well, absolutely, they don't care if they lose their health care, their house. They're just part of this team, and they don't want the team to lose. They want to own the libs, and that's like 40%. But it's not like 60%. And
Mhm.
I felt like during the Reagan years, the entire culture um, swung in the direction of greed is good, and it was there was really no other alternative culture that was being presented. It was all
It
like Dallas and Dynasty, and that's what we were living.
I it was yeah, I mean, it was a terrible time. I was very depressed, when Reagan was I was, this is I was, and we have a funny joke we still use, although not so much anymore since Trump is got elected again. Um, Michael and I will say, "Well, it's Reagan's fault. Everything is Reagan's fault. All goes back to when Reagan was elected, and it still might all go back to when he was elected." There was a really, depressing time.
I mean, it does. I mean, I wrote a whole column when the movie Reagan came out, which sort of came and went because it
Let's
was
see it.
nobody. It was Dennis Quaid, who I guess really admired Reagan,
Oh,
and
right.
he
Yeah, I didn't see
it
it.
came out I think
Mhm.
like last year, and I sort of I mean, a lot of people have written on this topic, so I'm not far from the first, but I sort of showed how the mythology of Reagan is very different from who Reagan was and what he did.
Mhm.
Reagan, for example, I don't watch MSNBC anymore, but Joe Scarborough was fond of talking about being a small government conservative and a conservative in the tradition of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was not a small government conservative. He was the guy who first exploded the national debt. The national debt tripled under Ronald Reagan. We had huge defense spending. Star Wars, which Trump is now trying to bring back under the name Golden Dome, which is such a great, stupid Trump name. I mean, he was all for he spent money like a drunken sailor. when it was on shit that he liked. He just didn't like spending money on poor people. And that is still
Right.
true today. But I mean, it's Reagan really did get the party started in many ways in terms of also being like a TV guy who
Mhm.
then made the transition to politics. And do you know what?
Right.
In 1980, when he ran for president uh, and won for the first time, do you know what his campaign slogan was?
Make America great again?
Very close. It was "Let's make America great again."
Yeah.
Trump just
Right.
took out the "let's" and
Right.
turned it from sort of a voluntary situation into an order. you know, but
Mhm.
but basically, you know, Trump only steals from the best, and it was Reagan, um, was marketed very successfully. I mean, it was, and
Yeah.
he has a lot to answer for. I mean, homelessness started under Reagan. This turned out to be a very funny conversation, hasn't it? As we
Yeah.
talked
We've
about.
really gone
home-
all over the place. How long have we been talking? About a half an hour. Um, well, are you optimistic about our democracy, Andy?
Well, I wrote a book a couple of years ago all about politics, and the last chapter was devoted to something called what I call the breaking system of democracy. And my somewhat optimistic assessment was that we will let things really get pretty horrible, but then we'll pull ourselves back from the brink.
Mhm.
And I mean I wrote this after Trump had already been elected once, so I sort of felt like, yeah, that was we went over the edge, we did go over the cliff, but then he did a disastrous job in a lot of ways, but especially during the pandemic, and that's when the braking system engaged, and we decided, all right, enough is enough. I do think it's going to engage again, not because we care about human rights or habeas corpus or anything like that. I think they're going to engage again because I think inflation is going to go through the roof. And I
Oh,
think
yeah.
that
Mhm.
even though Trump has been spooked by the bond market and has pulled back on a lot of his idiotic tariffs, there's enough um, there's enough disruption to the supply chain to already create kind of COVID-like problems. And
Mhm.
Americans, I mean, I've always felt like we will put up with a lot, especially when shit is happening to other people that we don't identify as us. But
Mhm.
um, but if like the internet goes out, or we can't get a Domino's pizza delivered proper, just like
Yeah.
I feel like we have a very low tolerance for discomfort.
Yeah. I
And
think that's pretty cynical, but I partially agree with you. I think there's half the country feels that way or is that way, and half the country is gunning for for humanity and for kindness to others, you know?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that some of the people who are on the right side of history are also um, pretty self motivated as well. So I don't think it's good versus evil, but I think that the other thing I would say, another reason why I'm potentially optimistic is because all this talk about like what's going to happen like in the midterms or in the next election, we're we're really focusing on like generic Democrats. Like we're saying, how will the Democrats do? And I'm not so sure that either party, and that includes the Republicans, that either party has much purchase on our attention anymore. I mean, Trump completely hijacked the Republican Party. I mean, he was not a people don't seem to remember this. Like in that election, um, in that nomination race, like Jeb Bush was running. People thought, oh yeah, Jeb Bush has a lot of money and he's got the Bush name. And he went absolutely nowhere. And
Mhm.
Trump was not a conventional Republican. He had been associated with a lot of Democratic candidates, and you know, he had, you know, he had hung out with the Clintons and all kinds of stuff. So basically, he just took this party and was sort of like in The Sopranos when Tony Soprano would, take over a business and hollow out a business just
Yeah.
by being horrible
Yeah.
and threatening
True.
violence. I mean, that's what Trump did to the Republicans. The Republican Party is now like a shell. And as a result, it's going to have a really hard time, I think, post-Trump because there's nothing
Yeah.
left to it. It's just
I agree.
it's a personality cult. Similarly, I don't think the Democrats. when you say the Democrats, I think that's a fairly meaningless term to most people. And I
Mhm.
think what we are is we're one great candidate away from winning. And that was true in 2008 when Barack Obama really came out of nowhere and became the candidate. People now
Yeah,
see Obama as this icon, but he was an insurgent candidate. He wasn't
I
supposed to get the nomination. And so we should focus less on party and I think more on candidate. Who's the person? And I don't know who that
mhm,
is yet. I don't think any of us knows. But
I
it's
agree.
again,
I
it's
was
a
in, I was in Europe, last month and, with Ann Telnis, the
yeah.
to our cartoonist, we were on a panel, we were talking together in front of an audience, and one of the questions was, do you think, from the Swiss people, do you think, the US is ready for a woman president? And I looked at Ann, and I was sort of deferring, I thought, "Well, I'm not gonna blurt it out," although I wanted to blurt it out. I said, "No, we're not." And, I wish that weren't so, but we're not. So if if the Democrats nominate a woman, AOC has always talked about, we're going to lose. I'm afraid. But so many factors can come into play before that. So it's hard to say that definitively, of course. But I just don't think Americans are going to vote for a woman.
Well, the proof is in the pudding because something like 60 other countries have had female heads of state.
Yeah, I
Um,
know.
and on every continent, pretty much, I think, except Antarctica. So I think that's fairly telling. We have a very
Hmm.
deep. I remember election night 2016, and I was at a party, and I agreed to co-host an election night party, and I I swore I would never do that because I'd had bad experiences in the past when you have an election night party and it goes the
It
wrong
goes the
way.
wrong way.
That is a
Yes,
bad party.
yes.
And I said to the co-host, who was like, he is like a pundit and an expert in predicting the future, unlike me. And I said, how do you think this night's going to go? Because if if Trump wins, this is going to be the shittiest party ever. And he said, Hillary is definitely going to win. Okay, so
So,
this is a
what time
guy
of
who
night
like
did he say that? When did he say that?
he
Early
said that
evening, I guess.
like when he was convincing me to co-host the party like a couple weeks before.
Oh, I see.
And this is a guy who makes a living predicting the future for corporate clients. Okay, so
Mm.
I went to this party and it very quickly became clear that this was going to be the worst night in American history up to that point. And um I was watching the returns with and this woman was standing next to me. I don't know who she was. And she said to me, um, as racist as this country is, I think it's more sexist. And my attitude is sort of like, why do we have to choose? Can't we excel at both racism and sexism?
We
Can't we
are.
multitask? Because we seem so good at both.
Wasn't
But
wasn't
at
it
this
Shirley
point,
Chisholm who was asked Shirley Chisholm was asked
yeah,
which was harder, and if for those of you who don't remember her, she was the first woman to run for president, I believe,
in
and she's a
72,
black senator or congresswoman, right?
Congresswoman.
Um,
Yeah.
and, she said, "Well, it's harder the sexism is harder than the racism."
Yeah. And
She was amazing.
there was a lot of sexism within the civil rights movement. I mean, that's
Mm.
one of the
Yeah, yeah, right.
sobering things that she's absolutely right. I mean, I think that it's not my call, but just based on history, we have elected um, a black man as president,
Yeah,
and we have
yeah.
not elected a woman yet. So until we elect a woman, I would say sexism was winning over racism. I would have to say for the time being. Um, but yeah, I mean, but again, it's all who the person is, and I don't, you know, when I see the polls that say like AOC and Pete Buttigieg and Kamala Harris, like these are people names that come up. I just want to remind people what do these three names have in common, and what they have in common is you recognize who these people are.
Mhm.
These are polls measuring nothing but name recognition.
Yeah, good point.
They're not
Yeah.
measuring how viable the candidates are, whether they would win, how good they would be if they were campaigning. They all three of those people are very admirable and they all have something going for them. But I don't think any of those three will be the nominee. And the reason why I say that is because um, There's this great Will Rogers quote that I like to quote a lot, which is he said, "I'm not a member of any organized political party. I'm a Democrat." And it's still true. I think we all can
Mhm.
relate to that quote.
Mhm.
But Democrats almost never nominate the front runner. It's something it happened um in 2016 with Hillary. Hillary was the front runner and she got the nomination. She didn't win. She did win the popular vote, I should remind people. But Democratic politics is littered with these smoldering candidacies of front runners who didn't make it, whether it's
Yeah. Yeah.
Gary Hart or Hillary Clinton in 2008. Um, in 1992, I don't remember who the front runner was, but it certainly was not Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was a
He came out of
very
nowhere too. Yeah.
he came out of nowhere, and he was mainly known for giving a horrendous speech at the 1988 Democratic
Right.
Convention, a speech that never ended. The first of many speeches he's given that have never ended. I mean, that's the other funny thing, which is that Bill Clinton was considered such a train wreck in 1988. His performances at the DNC are unchanged. He's still incredibly long-winded and boring, but now people love it. It's like a
Revering.
bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's his
Yeah.
trademark. But so he was another one who came out of nowhere. Barack Obama came out of nowhere. My guess is whoever the nominee will be, especially if it turns out to be a successful nominee, is not someone we're talking about right now.
Mhm.
That's just again, I'm not Nostradamus, but that's
Um, I'll, I'll,
my guess.
I'll come back to you in a couple years now. See what's going on. Well, this is fun.
Yes,
I
thanks for
love
inviting
talking
me.
history. You know your history, Andy. This is fun.
I know my
To
history in pockets. Like
yeah.
don't ask me about like South America during the 19th century.
Right.
I know like some history, but
Yeah.
it's like, it's like if you know something about like vintage port, and you can talk about vintage port, people assume you know something about
Well,
all wines. And
yeah.
actually vintage port is one of the easier things to get down because there are very few makers of vintage port and very few vintages. Whereas like if you wanted to talk about like, Cabernet
Bordeaux.
Sauvignon,
Yeah.
or Burgundy,
Yeah.
forget it. So I know in depth a few very small trivial topics, and I'm hoping that covers for my vast vistas of ignorance, which I'm trying to
Yeah.
conceal. So
Aren't we all trying to sound and smart? Um, well, thank you. I think we've
thank
probably
you.
bored people enough. Uh, we have 1,300 people here, which is
Wow,
fantastic.
that's
And
great. All
yeah,
right, well, everybody,
thank you all.
I want to say one last thing to everybody who's watching, who's still watching. That's an impressive number. Unless they just have left their phones on and they're doing something else, which is always a
Probably.
possibility.
Yes.
Um, I just want to say upgrade to the paid version of Liza's Substack. If you do nothing else today, because you've seen what a lovely person Liza is and what a good host she is. So,
Hmm.
that's my one final pitch. And you're not
Thank you,
allowed to
Andy.
make that pitch for me, Liza, because that'll seem very
Well,
insincere.
let's just say I am, without saying it, make the same pitch for Andy. By the way, I have to say this one thing. I'm so jealous that you got to talk to Jane Goodall. She's my hero, and people have always, over the years, when you get to be our age, people are like, young people say, "Well, who's your hero? Who do you admire most in your life?" And you'd think I'd pick a cartoonist or a writer or somebody. But it's Jane Goodall.
She's
She's my
amazing.
hero.
She's
She's like
amazing.
because I remember discovering her as a young person, and
Me too.
how she was this determined blonde, and I was always blonde, and quiet but determined person. And I thought she made a difference, even though she was a woman and she was quiet. And I thought that's I love that. So
Well, she was
anyway,
also like a lot of women who are very talented. She was consistently underestimated because she didn't come from the academic world.
yeah.
She, Dr. Leakey, who sent her out to Tanzania to look at the chimps, he had three women who he dispatched to observe different primates. Diane Fossey was one. I mean,
Mm.
and his attitude was that women would be more patient. And that was an interesting and I think astute observation. In the case of Jane, it paid off because she had to wait 6 months before the chimps stopped from running away from her. Like the first 6 months, they were
Yeah.
terrified of her and she couldn't get anywhere near them. And she was
Mhm.
afraid she was going to return to England in complete disgrace and
Right.
failure. And she was very patient. And I think that's an inspiring story for us because right now we all feel like, oh, the world is collapsing and everything. But Jane Goodall, I asked her when I interviewed her, I said, what is driving you? Because she's 91 and she's
Mm.
working nonstop, working way harder than you or I, Liza, I can tell you that. And
How do you know?
well, I'm speaking for myself. She's
Speak for
working a lot
yourself.
is working a lot harder than I am. And she said, I said, what is driving you? Where do you get your energy from? And she says, I'm just very obstinate. And she just refuses to give up. And look, it's had tangible results because the
Yeah.
Jane Goodall Institute is a global um, um,
Yeah.
conservation institution. And she's accomplished, you know, more than pretty much anybody. And it's very hard to accomplish as much as Jane Goodall has. And
Mhm.
so, but I think there's a good lesson for all of us because are always like throwing ourselves a pity party and um, look to the real icons like Nelson Mandela, was in prison for like almost 3 decades, and Jane Goodall, and the people who really have achieved what seems impossible, and
Right.
then say, really, is my deal so terrible? you
That's a
know,
great point, Andy. I mean, Martin Luther King, if you look at history is kind of reassuring. I think you alluded to that earlier. If you look back to certain times in our history, it was just as bad, if not worse, what's going
yeah,
on now. That doesn't mean we shouldn't, sit back and eat bonbons and do nothing, but
no,
um it's not as bad as I mean, I don't want to say that because it
it's
is
very
pretty
bad.
bad. But
Let's
anyway,
put it this way.
it has been worse.
Let's reframe that. It's very bad, but other times have also been very bad.
Yes,
This
there you
may
go.
be bad in a
You
different
sound
and
you sound like Fred
startling.
Rogers. Andy,
People,
you
it's
sound like
not.
Fred Rogers.
You're not the first person who's made that comparison, and I'm very flattered by that. I'm a
Oh, yeah.
reassuring. I try to be a reassuring presence, but the reason I do that is not to lull people into a false sense of security. It's to motivate them because what I always say to
Mhm.
people, and I guess I'll leave with this, Liza, because I know we've tried your 1,300 viewers' patience, probably down to like 900 now.
Yeah. Mhm.
Um, uh, Hopelessness is not a plan. I'm just gonna end with that.
Mhm. Right. I love it. Okay.
All right, bye bye.
So see you around on the internet, and, thanks again, Andy.
Thanks, Liza. Bye bye.
Bye.